gentlemen, thanks for being here to talk about Greyfriars Hall and this little roundtable discussion, help out prospective students figure out whether they might want to come join us here at Greyfriars. So I want to start, Doug, with you. Greyfriars has actually been around for about 25 years.
Okay, yeah.
And for most of its history, it was a ministry of Christ Church.
Right.
And had 20 or so guys come through it over the years. Were you a Greyfriars?
I was.
Okay,
Yes.
so I'm going to ask you about some questions in a second.
Right.
So, why are we expanding Greyfriars? Why have we done what we've done, moving it sort of out of Christ Church, partnering with NSA, coming under NSA? What's the reason for that?
So your question assumes that we have a reason for doing the thing, which is a correct assumption. So, like I said, we had Greyfriars Hall running it as a ministerial hall. So it was the equivalent of a graduate degree in theology and ministry and so forth. We wanted the work to be equivalent and so on. But at the end of the process, what you got was a letter. We weren't pretending to offer an academically accredited degree. And so we offered the letter that we could personalize. It wasn't a standard diploma. It was a letter concerning Smith or Jones or Murphy. And commending, or Toby, commending strengths and if there were weaknesses to watch out for, it was a letter. So it was very personal and in-house and it was rigorous. There were a lot of books involved and so on. The way it was structured, I think, provided good equipping and good training. But the fact that we offered a letter at the end of it meant that the options for someone leaving Greyfriars were fairly limited. Ministering in the CREC, or it was sort of a narrow gauge training, and an MDiv, which this will be an accredited MDiv, opens more doors. Right. At the same time, there were some big advantages to what we were doing, and because NSA and Christ Church worked together very closely, and we're all in a small town, we were able to hammer out a system where NSA could take over the academic structure of the program while having a cooperation agreement with the church that enabled us to keep the things about the old Greyfriars that we appreciated, while at the same time getting the advantages of having an accredited degree like an MDiv that would be recognized outside of our circles.
Yeah.
Right. So, and the essential thing that we wanted to hang on to was the training of future ministers occurring within the context of the church. We think the church ought to be training her future leaders, and that is not something we've lost with this new system. NSA is providing the academic structure, the classes, but in order to complete the MDiv, you have to be placed at your second year. You have to be placed in one of our local churches as an intern, where you would start meeting with the session there. You would participate in the pastoral work. So it's a academic degree coupled with on-the-job training, apprenticeship, mentoring.
Great. One of the things we're able to do now, too, is in the old Greyfriars, there was a handful at a time, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys. It was still a 3-year program, but it was much more small. Here, we're aiming 8 to 12 per year, so 24 to 30 something at any given time once we're up and running. Why do you think that's really important right now? What need are we trying to meet by expanding and having more guys be able to come through?
Yeah, there are more guys coming through, which is good. I mean, more numbers is a positive. At least compared to my seminary experience, this whole cohort will be remarkably smaller, right? If you're at one of these huge seminaries. So probably what will distinguish this MDiv is that fact that you're going to be going through with other men, linking arms with them, getting to know them. Doug mentioned the component of the internship with the church. So one of the most interesting things about this particular program is that it's still an embodied program in a tiny town with a huge Christian presence. So that maps onto the size, how many people are there. But I don't know of another kind of town on the map that gets as much action and much chaos as Moscow. And the fact is, if you're going to come and attend this seminary, this MDiv program, you're going to be confronted with all of those realities that simply aren't present at another institution.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're going to be kind of worked into the local life of the church.
Mm-hmm.
You're in a small group where you're going to be known. You're not just going to be able to come be kind of an academic guy that doesn't actually have a calling to ministry. There's not going to be a place to hide in that sense. So guys that say, I really do want to kind of be on the front lines and not just what's happening in the classroom with men that understand culture, how to shape it, how to teach it, but actually kind of being thrown right into the mix by my very presence in the community. I think that's a huge plus to the program, and one reason why you probably need 8 to 12 guys in a program.
Yeah, I think my experience at Bethlehem was that the cohort really does make the thing really unique. You're not just grab bagging courses here and there, and you might see a guy in one course, but there's a couple hundred people on campus, and maybe, and you kind of choose your own adventure through it. But you have a sequence. You've got a band of brothers who go through the program together. Really does enable a depth in terms of the education. As a professor, it's really great to be able to go like, I know what they've already had. I know what they're going to get, so I know what I need to do. And you can go deeper as opposed to trying to scattershot.
One of the advantages of an increased size in the cohort, at least for us, going from 4 to 12, let's say, is that one of the criticisms that's been leveled at Greyfriars over the years, which up to a certain point was a fair criticism, is the Christian community here has exploded and grown. As we've been putting graduates out, the graduates have been filling needs that we've had locally. And somebody might say, well, don't send your young aspiring minister to Moscow because it's Hotel California.
They'll stay.
They'll stay. They'll graduate. They're graduating their own future leaders. And that has happened to a certain extent. But that's happened because of the size of the cohort we had and the explosive growth of the church here. With this size, that we're going to be doing what we want to do, which is training ministers for North America.
Right.
We're going to be sending a significant number of ministers out.
And that's significant because I think all of us are aware right now of places, people who have said, hey, put out a Macedonian call, come over and help us.
Right.
You have a group of people who've started a school, but they don't really have a church that's aligned with a kind of robust build and fight vision. You've got places that are, listening to Canon Plus or Cross Politic, and there's a core of people who really buy in, but they don't have a pastor, they don't have a church. They want it, but where are they going to get it? There's not another seminary that has a kind of build and fight vision, a hopefulness about the kingdom of God on earth, big God theology, covenant renewal worship, all of these things that are sort of Moscow CREC distinctives, and there's nothing available. Well, we got to scale up. And so being able to have guys come and then launch them back out to go meet those needs in really strategic places, I think is one of the reasons I'm most excited about this.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you did it.
Yeah.
You did the old version. Tell a little bit about like what was the best part of it for you in terms of your experience. Like what was really good about, because we're keeping as much as we can of the old as we level it up, but like what was the best part about it for you?
The voice of a survivor.
Yeah, that's right.
Listen, I started the program not even convinced I was going into the ministry, but I wanted to keep reading theology with Pastor Doug.
Okay.
And somehow he thought that was okay and let me.
So you graduated from NSA?
Yeah, I was an NSA grad. I thought vaguely I wanted to do some kind of grad school program.
Yep.
There was no MA at NSA at the time, so there's no grad program at NSA. I was looking into other programs, wasn't in a hurry to leave, young, married, just starting to have kids. I thought, well, the next best thing I'll keep reading and studying with Pastor Wilson. And so I started and initially was kind of more of an auditor, but then after a year or two, started taking everything for credit, basically. And I would say the best thing about it was actually smallish classes with Pastor Wilson. And then very quickly, a year or two into it, sitting in on elder meetings and beginning to do the practical stuff that Pastor Wilson was just talking about, the internship type stuff. And in those days, it was a lot more informal. It wasn't, here's the program, but I was there, I was around the elders, I was around the pastors, and eager to help where I could. And so I started teaching a catechism class for kids at one point when a Greyfriar above me left to go plant a church in Virginia. So then I took over. I was his sub before that. And then, but then I was sitting in on elder meetings. And then as pulpit supply opportunities came around, so the reading list, the course, the classroom time is really key. But I think it's that combined with really on the ground pastoring, real life pastoring. And I think, honestly, the time spent in elder meetings was probably some of the most potent stuff. By the time I went and pastored the first church I pastored for a couple of years, it was like I'd been in an ER for a couple of years and watched the doctors run the ER. And it's really hard to panic when you've seen pretty much everything come into the ER. And you watch a bunch of seasoned elders say, well, what does the Bible say? And let's handle it. Let's do our best we can. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it doesn't work out like you hope, but you just you believe God, you obey the Bible, and you keep trucking. That was huge for me.
Yeah, there's like, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking the counseling dimension of pastoral ministry, and then second category would be the leadership dimension of pastoral ministry. And perhaps third would be kind of that intimate relationship between the pulpit and the world, or particularly around here, shaping culture, institutional building, growth, community impact, the city's suing you or you're suing
There's
the
an
city.
ecosystem of, it's not just there's a church, but then you've got school, you've got a lot of people in businesses, you've got all sorts of other activity, and the church is like the heartbeat.
Right.
And you've got to be able to get that ecosystem. So
those three categories, counseling, leadership, and whatever this third one is, cultural engagement.
Yeah.
Those are like, the honest truth is, you go to a seminary, you'll talk about it. Like you'll take a full class in it. I mean, I took a class in pastoral ministry and leadership. I took a class in counseling, maybe two. I took a class in kind of cultural engagement and whatnot. But you cannot get to where you need to be without sitting in rooms and watching men do it. Like you sit in a counseling session, you're like, he said that. Why did he say that? Why did he leave that? Why did he not bite that? Why did he go that way? And you game it out real quick afterwards, and you can make leaps and bounds in your counseling. And then leadership is more like, there's various kinds of leaders, what level you can get at, but like, what do you do with people in your organization or entity that aren't in the right seat on the bus, and how long do you wait, and why? And is it time? Is it not time? Is it time to go and, chop someone up in 12 pieces and send them around to the 12 tribes of Israel? Or not,
so to speak.
That was a metaphor. So you see those decisions, but you really have to be in the ethos, like smelling the aroma to get where you need to get. So that's another advantage of a small cohort.
Let's talk a little bit about that kind of the academic course of study. So, we designed this to be, again, kind of carefully sequenced. There's a sort of what I call like the redemptive history backbone of the program, Old Testament survey in the first year, New Testament in the second year, church history in the third. You kind of cover creation to the present day over the course of the program. You got that element. You got the biblical languages, Hebrew, year one, Greek, year two, and then kind of probably a dual, use them both in the third year. Theology, covenant foundations, cultural foundations, Reformed dogmatics, biblical theology. Then the practical ministry courses, homiletics, counseling, apologetics and ethics, things like that, and then the internship. You guys, we're all involved in this at some level, teaching at various places. So I just maybe give a little bit of like what you've done or what you will do in the course, kind of where you're slotted. So you're going to teach right out of the gate, fall semester, next fall. You've taught this kind of course before, but it's basically a hermeneutics course, which people go, wait, Doug teaches Doug teaches a hermeneutics course? Like, what do you do in the hermeneutics course for these guys?
Many years ago, and I don't know what possessed me to do this, but
the Holy Spirit.
It's gotten me in all the trouble. And at the time, I was not aware of really anything. G.K. Beale has done a lot of work on this at a scholarly level, a lot of good work. But it's basically how does the New Testament handle the Old Testament, and can we learn interpretive principles? Can we learn are hermeneutic from Jesus and the apostles. And what I did is I got a copy of the Bible that I wanted to mark up, and I marked every Old Testament quotation in the New Testament, and then marked at the bottom of the page where it was from. And most Bibles will tell you that, it's all laid out for you. But they don't tell you in the Old Testament. So I then looked up all the verses in the Old Testament, highlighted them the same color, and then wrote in the margin where in the New Testament this is quoted. So if I'm reading Psalm 2 or in Genesis, I'll have highlighted sections. And, Jesus talks about this verse here, and Peter talks about this verse here. And then I have an apostolic study Bible. I can look up what the apostles taught about Noah's flood, which is Christian baptism. Or I can, I'm reading along with Hagar and Sarah in Genesis. Well, these two women are two covenants, Paul says in Galatians. And it's disorienting, actually, initially, if you've grown up with sort of an Enlightenment-informed historical grammatical interpretive grid. Now, I teach historical grammatical interpretation, but the historical grammatical interpretation means Paul says Hagar and Sarah are two covenants.
That's what the grammar says.
Do the historical grammatical analysis of that. So you do this, and so the track or the lectures through that year are us each week looking at a passage in the New Testament that's from the Old Testament, and what does the New Testament tell us about this? So there's another great book by Richard Longnecker on apostolic interpretation or something, and it's a great book with all the stuff he lays out. But then in the last chapter, he says, now don't try this at home.
You're not allowed to do it, but you can't do it.
Yeah, Jesus did it, the apostles did it, but you're not allowed. And we want
but I'm gonna.
we want to teach the students to, you're not only do you get to, but you really must.
Good. So there's a way of approaching the Bible. We're doing that. You're going to be teaching covenant foundations.
Yes.
What are you going to do with that?
Yes. Speaking of these two women, Sarah and Hagar, the integration of courses, right? You have this thing going on. Covenant foundations, covenant everything. So covenant peanut butter and jelly, covenant coffee roasters. Of course,
covenant theology like you've never heard.
Covenant theology.
Covenant Baptists.
Covenant Baptists. You got those things going on. You got magisterial Baptists. You got covenant Baptists. All this stuff. But yes, I'm going to deal with covenant. And what is it? I say, if you're going to be a Berean who loves the Bible, then you're going to have to figure out what this word means. I think it appears 283 times in the Old Testament, appears like 33 times in the New Testament. It's a biblical word, so start there.
It's in the title of both of them.
Old and new. But, and this has been a hallmark of kind of Moscow's thinking, and I am personally convinced that it is, in a sense, the key ingredient in the kitchen that has produced the kind of cultural reformation and growth of Christendom that we have experienced here in this town. It's not the only ingredient, maybe because somebody could even fight over it being the key. I mean, the Spirit is the key ingredient, just the blessing of God and humility and faithfulness. But this covenant idea has a heaven and earth connection, because God, the Father in heaven, is the one who makes covenant on earth from the very beginning. And so it kind of yokes together heaven and earth, and then it yokes people together, because the covenant is not just made with a solitary individual, but always with a man and his seed. And of course, that includes this corporate entity that God deals with corporately according to covenant terms. It's eschatological or teleological in nature, because it always concerns some kind of future blessing. And then you have the condition of like faith and obedience in order to see the manifestation of the promises. So whereas most of our ministry is kind of keys in on the individual, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. We go to heaven by ones, and we should care about the individual, but we forget about the covenantal or corporate dimension of the people of God. And so this doctrine, we're going to deal with it structurally: covenant of life, covenant of grace, and various administrations, and basically beginning to see it. But by the end, it's not just, oh, now I know my systematic approach to covenant theology, but it's actually a covenantal sense that gets in you. You're reading texts and thinking about them covenantally. So, so if you tie it to Hagar Sarah, it's actually quite fun because it's like, who are the two covenants that he's talking about? And I take that to be the Old and New Covenant, which means Hagar is actually the covenant of grace, but she's the Old Testament form. She's the slavery form. She's a slave woman. She's not a strange woman. She's a slave woman in Abraham's household. And so you kind of toy around with that and see what's happening with the Old Covenant, how it's coming to an end, what's happening with the New Covenant. And then it'll have implications into practical work. So what does covenantal preaching look like? What's covenant worship look like? What's covenant marriage and covenant families? And so,
the other day in a pastoral meeting, we were talking about a particular situation, and you brought up, hey, we need to remember we're dealing with a body here. I mean, it was a marriage issue. We're dealing with a body. There's a head and a body, and we need to treat them together, not just as sort of isolated individuals. So that was, here's covenant theology being brought into. It's not just we're counseling Bill and Sue. Bill and Sue are one flesh. Bill and Sue are one covenantal unit, and we need to think of them that way and orient properly. So
I'd like to tag one thing on, because we believe that a covenant is a solemn bond, sovereignly administered with attendant blessings and curses, and because we believe covenants encompass everything, including the material world. That means the attendant blessings and curses are material. The application results in blessings or chastisement in this world. It's not just a 17th dimension spiritual blessing, and it actually affects everything.
And to piggyback also, that includes politics. So covenant marriage, covenant church, covenant nations. So I mean, that's a piece of that practical.
Yeah. This is, to underscore both of these things that have just been said, is basically in America, in large part, I'd say a large swath of American evangelicalism does take a very materialistic and political approach to the Old Testament, and then those both get pulled out in the new, right? So the new covenant is spiritual, the new covenant is heavenly, and we've actually lost this idea of, no, God swore an oath about Canaan's land in the Old Testament, and then that's expanded to cover the whole wide earth. Right. So it grows, but it actually keeps its materiality. It keeps its earthiness.
It's spiritual and material. It's heavenly and earthly. Right. They go together.
Good. So I'll be teaching probably cultural foundations next year, which I'll just give the brief thing there is, what is kind of the vision for engaging the culture that we operate with. I think this is something that a lot of people are interested, the so-called Moscow mood. How do we approach revival, reformation, renewal of Christendom? And so we'll be looking at some of the, what are the big issues out there? And so you think of works by Carl Trueman and things like that on kind of analyzing the modern context, but also planning to use a book like That Hideous Strength as a kind of blueprint for engaging the culture or fighting a culture war in a really unusual way, by small, communities of really potent, faithful Christians who are able to fight the demons and the scientists who are trying to steer everything. So that'll be that's a fun little course, kind of a foundational approach there. You've taught homiletics for a number of years, so how do you? That's it's towards the end. This is like a third-year course, right? But it's good getting what do you do with preaching?
Well, I think that's been another one of those areas where God's blessed our community with potent preaching. And we believe that this is central to how God has driven his purposes forward in the world, in history. You see that in Scripture all the way down to the present. And so it's not just ideas in our head, but these are the truths of God, the faithfulness of God, the covenant-keeping God, and it's that proclaimed. So for whatever reason, this is just God's wisdom. It could have been done in any number of other ways. But in his wisdom, he sends men to proclaim it. From Enoch and Noah to Moses, to the prophets, to Jesus, to the apostles, to Augustine, to John Calvin, to Whitefield. And so we believe that if we're going to see a reformation and revival in our day, it's going to be led by a whole bunch of men proclaiming the whole counsel of God, all of Christ for all of life to all the world. And so the backbone of my course is actually 1 Timothy. So it's been a 2-year course for many, many years, and it'll now be I'll actually be teaching 2 hours a week rather than 1 hour a week. So I'll do it all in 1 year now instead of 2. And so just many years ago, as I was thinking about how to structure the course, thought, well, there's Paul giving instructions to a young preacher. Mm-hmm. And so we just go verse by verse through 1 Timothy, slow down in certain places. And that does, for a homiletics course, I think is really striking, because most of the instructions that Paul's giving to Timothy in 1 Timothy aren't how to stand, the inflection of your voice, or how to deliver a good speech. Mm-hmm. We read some books and discuss that, and there's a bunch of workshopping. So every class period, my students stand up and give short exhortations. Mm-hmm. So they're practicing standing up in front of people, delivering a message cogently in 3 to 5 minutes kind of thing. Then we do periodic preaching retreats, where we actually give a little bit longer messages to one another. But the backbone is noticing the things that Paul is most concerned about with the young preacher Timothy, actually is character and leadership. Mm-hmm. It's not delivery, but of course that affects what you're talking about and how you're talking about it. So 1 Timothy, and then there's a scattershot of I think 10 or so other texts that are sprinkled in as extra lessons that are about preaching, about from Acts and the Gospels and others. And then there's about, I think it's about 15, 18 books that we'll read over the course of the year on preaching or on somewhat related tasks. But the goal is I begin every year with my very first lecture is why you should probably quit now. And it's based on a riff off of Spurgeon's lectures to my students, which is one of the first books you read. In one of the opening sections, he quotes an old divine who actually said that to his ministerial students: if you can do anything else, do it. Mm-hmm. Get out now. Mm-hmm. And meaning, when you stand in the pulpit, you are you just put a electrical a rod up in the air in the middle of an electrical storm. Mm-hmm. You're asking to get struck. You're asking. There's a target on your back, and are you sure you want to do this? And that's a theme that we return to repeatedly. Pastor Wilson said for years, preaching is a job that takes courage. It ought to take courage. It's the kind of thing that ought to scare you every time you get into the pulpit. Don't screw this up. And at the same time, that if you do it right, the devil and all his angels are after you, plus, somebody from the New York Times.
Right. Good.
But I repeat myself.
Okay, so you got a guy who's hearing this and kind of going, maybe he's in the situation you were in whenever you were trying to decide. What advice, if you have a guy who's hears this, likes some of what we're saying, but has questions about sort of what we might call secondary doctrinal beliefs, whether it's particulars of sacramentology, baptism, got some questions, not sure where I'm at. Maybe even the stuff when it comes to covenant theology or Calvinism, I know those things.
Child communion.
Postmillennialism. Post-mill, all of these sort of areas. So they're an evangelical, they're a Protestant, they want to go to seminary, but they've got questions about these sort of doctrines that we think are important and that we trumpet. Do you say to that guy, well, figure that stuff out first and then come? Or do you say, no, you should come because we'll help you figure it out?
I'd say if they ought to know enough to know, could they get along with us?
Okay.
But if they're across the country and they're looking at what we're doing and they're saying, I really like what they're doing, not sure about that doctrinal distinctive or that one, I'd say, come on. Mm-hmm. And that's not a come on, we'll convince you necessarily. But it's a come on, if you can get along with us, we can get along with you.
Right.
And you could go 3 years of Greyfriars and still not be convinced of child communion or postmillennialism or whatever. And now I would say that's probably relatively rare, but it's certainly possible.
We budgeted for that.
Yeah, and it wouldn't bother us really. If we're all pulling roughly in the same direction, we want to take America for Jesus. We want to see every knee bow and every tongue confess, and we want to see that acknowledged in the public square and churches worshiping Jesus faithfully on the Lord's Day. Come on, you're welcome.
The one thing to take into consideration is it's not having to do with our willingness to fellowship with you and teach you and help you. It wouldn't break any bonds of fellowship. But if you're called to the ministry and you get trained in Moscow, and then you come out of Moscow not believing some of the things we think are important, but you'd be tainted in a lot of the you'd be tainted in a lot of the Reformed evangelical world, because they would think that you've bought into the whole thing, and then the people who are in our circles would be aware of the fact that you don't want to fall between two stools.
Right.
So you want to be at least open to being persuaded by the word, and then go wherever God leads you to go.
Yeah.
But it's not a matter of, unlike some seminaries, we don't require you to sign a statement that you believe all the details of what we've been teaching.
Yeah, we try to kind of gauge, what is where are you at in the application process? It's, what confession do you look to? Do you take any exceptions? But it's not a, rigorous sort of, we're trying to slot you out or things like that. It's, in general, are you pulling the same direction? Right. We're funded in a kind of unique way. Every student who's accepted into Greyfriars gets an Ezra scholarship. Ezra set his heart to study the law of the Lord and to do it and to teach it. And that the ability to set your heart to study means that if you're, pulled in 15 different directions by all the job you have to do, it's really hard to set your heart to study. So we wanted to make this as affordable as possible. Every student gets $15,000 towards their tuition, leaving the cost to them at $5,000. And this is privately funded. We don't take no USAID money, no government funding. We're raising this from churches and private individuals who believe and want to see more sort of Moscow theology run in the nation. But guys still have to balance. If they have a family, they still have to balance it. These kind of different obligations. How would you help someone who's trying to decide, hey, I've got a wife, I maybe have a couple kids, a couple young kids. Is seminary a good idea for me at this time?
I haven't counted, but most of our Greyfriars students are young married men with kids.
Okay.
And of course, you don't want to have the seminary set up as the academic machine that eats people, right? Or that eats families, and you graduate with your MDiv and also divorced.
Right.
You don't want that. So the community is a great support, not only for the wife and the kids, but also for a husband who's working a job and feeding the family and taking these courses. And we have seen a number of young men navigate this successfully. It's something that can be done, and we've seen it done over and over. If a wife is given to a man to help him in his calling, then there's no reason to assume that she couldn't be a help to him in his preparation for his calling. And so we've seen that. We know it works. The aspect of the tuition, the scholarship that funds three-quarters of it. Three-quarters of every student is funded by a scholarship, and then 1/4 of it is paid by the student. And what that means is that the church has invested in this person. We believe in this person. We think he's got something going for him, and we're willing to support that. At the same time, the applicant, the seminarian himself, is making a similar statement at a reasonable level. I believe in this call enough to put some money down. And it's the old skin in the game thing. If you just give everything away for free, then sometimes people value it at that level.
Right.
And so we want the church, broadly speaking, we want the church to say, yes, this young man has promise. And we want the young man to say, yeah, I believe I'm called.
And that's something too, just to widen out there. If there are places in the country that are going, man, like we said, we really want a pastor. We need somebody to come do it. Well, funding an Ezra scholarship, and then letting us know, hey, we're ready as soon as you have one. Get in on that and help us do this education, and then we can, Lord willing, launch a guy back to you.
And another alternative is, let's say you've got a group of people, like-minded people that want to plant a church, and they've got a promising young man in their midst who wants training, they can say, look, if you come back to us, we're willing to.
We'll cover the extra 5.
We'll cover the extra 5.
I'm just sitting here thinking about how I got skinned. You know, I went to seminary in 2007, 2008, and I was paying $1,500 a course. So I'm like tallying it up. It took a couple of terms. I was like, man, that was 2009. It's 2025.
Yeah.
So this is a very reasonable approach. I think. I think it's feasible. It's doable. And while my seminary approach had different particularities in it for how it served the family, like how I kept the family first in the midst of it. Some of the key principles are when you're training for ministry, all of those 1 Timothy 3 qualifications are still present there. If you don't care for your own household, how are you going to care for the church of God?
Right.
So there are many men that make the mistake of going to seminary. Their wife gets a full-time job. They're at the library all day long. Like, it's not appropriate. It's not structured correctly. It's just destroying families. So, but if you're a hustler, like if you work hard and you think these are going to be the times when I study and this is time with the family, and you watch those trajectories closely, you hold them, have accountability, it can totally be done. But you have to make sure that you plan accordingly and execute in the week to week.
You will go to bed tired.
Yeah.
I like to tell the guys that I think they're practicing training for ministry. It should be a lot more like boot camp than most seminaries seem to understand, which needs to take everything that's been said into consideration, meaning you got to pay your bills, take care of your wife, take care of your kids. And frequently, God is in the process of weeding out those who are called or not called through that, because sometimes you get into it and you realize that your wife isn't cut out to be the helper for a preacher. She would be much better as a helper to a Christian school teacher or something like that. And so you've got to be guarding all that, engaging that constantly, and having a community that holds you accountable and gives you good feedback and honest feedback on it. But nevertheless, all things being equal, I think what happens is a lot of times you got these seminary programs that are actually far lighter in terms of all the pressures. It may be high on academic side, and it may not require all the same things, but it's not set up to actually show you what real ministry would be like. And I think that's what this is designed to do, where it's like, yeah, you're going to be busy, you're going to be tired, you are getting a bunch covered for you, but the fact that you've got 3 kids under the age of 5 and a wife, and you're having to juggle all that plus internship plus a job is like, actually, this is not really, may not sound encouraging, but it's not going to get any easier.
Right. Yeah. Welcome to it.
I mean, when you get it and you get ordained, you're only like, now you're going into the real battle. So you really need to be thinking in terms of, and I've told this before, but I did Greyfriars, and then I did seminary for 2 years in South Carolina. And I was an okay student, but I got my very best grades when I had, our second kid, and I was preaching full time at a church plant. And it just it doesn't make sense. It's like I had less on my plate and I didn't do as well. And then the more that God put on my plate, the better I did. And but I think that's how guys need to be thinking.
Well, we've thought in terms of trying to make the family, enabling guys to care for their families well. By the way that we, will likely have classes scheduled only on a few days a week that'll free you to work on other days of the week.
Right.
You do have the community. You'll be going through it with another group of people. If you get here,
right,
and there's at least 8 or 9 or 10 other people who are in the exact same boat. You're fresh off the boat. They're fresh off the boat. Right. I remember when I went to seminary in a similar kind of model at Bethlehem. It was really great that all of a sudden you get there and it's there's a bunch of other folks who are in the exact same position for the sake of your wife. I was newly married, and there was other wives who were going, we just got here too and we don't know what's going on. That allows for, you're not the lone person showing up, right, and nobody knows you and nobody knows what's going on. So we are trying to, there are ways that we're trying to integrate the families in terms of the welcoming and providing ways to get them plugged into the community. What are the ideal characteristics for a Greyfriars student? If someone's they're trying to self-eval, am I a good candidate for this? What sorts of things would you guys say? What are you looking for as we've been having meetings and discussing the applicants we have currently? What are the things that you guys are listening for or looking for that make an ideal candidate?
I would much rather have a candidate to whom we needed to say, whoa, or slow down, or not that way, than someone that we had to say giddy up to. If we don't want to have our program be a program to motivate the apathetic or to motivate people who want an indoor job with no heavy lifting, and they want to read heady books of theology, and they don't want to get out and do things of actual ministry. We don't want to. We hope we motivate and encourage, but we don't want to be the foundational motivation. I'd much rather have a young man that we have to say whoa to than giddy up to. That would be the first, and of course all the encompassing things you mentioned. 1 Timothy, particularly 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1. What is the character of this young man? Does he love God? Does he love Jesus? Does he love God's people? Does he love the Word of God? Does he want to learn how to love it better?
Is he self-controlled? Does he have his passions under control and whatever, from anger to lust or whatever? Those are sort of things that if you've got anger issues, if you've got porn issues, those need to get dealt with first as a matter of basic sort of Christian maturity, and then then it's the time to explore it.
All things being equal, I'm generally think that men who are married and have families are gonna it's going to be that much better for you. You're not disqualified if you're not married or don't have kids yet. But I would just say, I think that's a strength is because of the household qualification. And so you can practice this all at the same time. I got to get my reading done. I got to practice that sermon, and I got to love my wife well. And I got to make sure my kids have enough, fuel in the tank. So I think that's a particularly helpful thing. And then I would say, to Doug's point, is also just some indications that you're already doing ministry. That you're not thinking I have to wait until I get a certificate or a degree before I can do it. Now, you may not be preaching in a church yet, but are you teaching a Sunday school class? Do you lead a Bible study? Are you doing personal evangelism?
Teaching your family.
Yeah. And is your family growing in the Lord? I would want to see some indications that you're already doing ministry. You already love the ministry. Again, that's back to, are you called to this? Can you do anything else? Maybe you should do something else. Yeah. And it's sort of this drive of, but I really need, God willing, I need to do ministry, and there's already signs of doing it.
Right, and so you have both kind of that fire in the belly, kind of internal aspiration, sense of calling. I really want to do this. I love the Bible, and I want to teach it. Coupled with some kind of external.
People are actually letting you.
Yeah, and people are saying, man, when you tell me what the Bible means, I get a lot of help. Right. You're getting those kinds of encouragements along the way. Those are really good signs that you're heading down the right path. Okay, so now the question is, we do have what we affectionately refer to as the off-ramp.
Yes.
So students who are accepted, they're accepted into the program. They are Greyfriars in their first year, but the first year is a kind of acclimation year. They land, get plugged into one of the churches, get their family settled, take in the classes.
Hazing.
We call it hazing. That's right. Get settled, and then it's in the second and the third year where we end up with an actual internship in one of the local churches, whether it's Christ Church or one of our services. So we have Christ Church downtown, Christ Church Troy, or King's Cross, or Trinity. There's a number of churches that are set up to fulfill this internship, but we recognize in that first year that we might come across a guy and say, we need to off-ramp you. What would be the sorts of things that would lead us to say to a guy, hey, you're not, the churches are saying you're not ministry material. What are they going to be looking at?
Well, actually, there's two sides of this. Toby mentioned one side earlier where halfway through the first year, he and his wife realized, I thought I was called to this, but I don't think I am.
Right.
And we've seen that happen a number of times, and it's no shame or embarrassment. It's like you learn something.
Right.
But we've constructed the program in such a way that you can do the first year, and if you say, oh, I'm not cut out for the ministry, but if I give up now, I've just thrown away a year. Well, no, you haven't, because we've structured it such that you could take the off-ramp and do another year and get a master's degree.
Yeah. So you still get an MDiv, but you get an MA, which would be, could be helpful if you wanted to teach in a classical Christian school.
Correct.
If you wanted to pursue more academics, if you wanted to go MA and then maybe go get a PhD, you discover. When I went to seminary, I thought I'm going to do church planning, but then I got into it and realized, the academy. I really like classrooms. I think I'm going to go more of an academic, and I've got a foot in both worlds.
Right.
But it was the academics that kind of really grabbed me, and so that was a good path.
So the the decision to take the off ramp might be the seminarian's decision.
Mm-hmm.
Where he said, I think I'll just either be done now, or I'll stay another year at a lighter pace and get a master's instead of an MDiv, which is 2 more years.
Yep.
But the other scenario is where after a year of worshiping, working, teaching this person, we come to the conviction that no, this is not a good fit for you. The same off ramp exists. So if we make a decision like that, a critical decision like that, which would be evidenced by you not being placed in an internship.
Yeah.
The internship is a graduation requirement, basically. Right. You need to be placed in an internship. And if we decide not to place you in an internship, then you have to take the off-ramp.
Right.
Okay? But the things that we're looking for that would make it cause us to do that sort of thing is, let's say someone has, he's a brain with feet, and he loves academics, loves books, loves the library, and people annoy him. If they don't come in with all your problems, I'm memorizing Turretin right now. So if they're a brain with feet and no pastoral manner, and that becomes glaringly obvious, his grades are great, but it's just this dog won't hunt.
Right.
We would say, well, we're not in a position to place you in an internship right now, but we're not ripping you off because you can still get a grad degree. That would be one thing. Another would be some sort of moral failing, character issues, that sort of thing. We would not be doing it for light and trivial reasons. We wouldn't refuse to place someone in an internship because you took one of the instructor's parking spots or something. But don't do it.
Still,
don't risk it.
Don't risk it.
But basically, that's the sort of thing. Character issues.
Yeah. So if they get here and all of a sudden you realize the home's a big mess. That didn't come through in the application and the conversations, but there's issues with husband and wife dynamics or with the kids, moral failure. All of a sudden there's a pornography issue or something like that. And you go, hey, we can't put you forward at a church as a sort of leader in training because of these sort of issues. But there's no reason that you couldn't continue if it was still good for you and your family to stay in the community and finish an MA, and there might be other opportunities for you to teach, for you to use if you're a gifted teacher in some way in a educational context or some other thing like that.
This is a perfect structure. I mean, it's reasonable, makes sense. If you're moving to a new place, you're not sure what it's going to look like after a year, and the institution is not sure exactly who you are. We've looked over an application, we've had an interview with you, we've considered your those who know you, who've given testimony to your character and whatnot. But it's very fitting to say, hey, there's going to be a year, and then we'll see what happens. And if I'm out there listening to this as a guy that's thinking about a seminary, the key signal I'm getting is that Greyfriars isn't going to be a paper mill. There are paper mills. Like, you can go and get an MDiv. It's like not a problem. Right. You can go do that somewhere. But Greyfriars really cares about the people that graduate from this particular institution, and there's a stamp on it, and there's a high bar. And if that's the kind of thing that compels you, then that moves you, then apply. That's a good fit. If that's the kind of thing that repels you, then that's a good indicator that maybe this isn't the right move.
Now, membership at a CREC church isn't like a requirement in any sense of the word to coming. You could be coming out of any kind of ecclesiastical background. It's more, are you a fit for us? So we don't expect students to be members of the CREC because there's not enough churches anywhere, things like that. But would you say that adopting the so-called Moscow mood, like, do you have to be all in on what we affectionately refer to, thanks to Kevin DeYoung, the Moscow mood? Do you have to be all in on that in order to come?
It depends on what you mean by all in. So, for example, some people think that if they move here, they have to start doing the mood themselves. It has to transform their preaching or their blog posts or their writing so that they have to become embodiments of the mood. I think nobody should move here if they're not good with other people doing it. So the issue is not, do I have to develop a sarcastic retort? Should I practice on my wife?
Yes.
The answer is no.
No, period. That's not it. Anyway.
No, don't do that.
That's not the mood. That's not the mood.
That's not the mood. But basically, you can't come here and then be surprised at the fact that that other people are taking it in stride when certain leaders or certain individuals are exhibiting it. But most of the people here are cheerful, happy, ordinary Christians that you would meet in any well-adjusted church anywhere. And it's not a matter of us hacking each other to pieces. That just doesn't happen.
So it's basically, if someone's going to chafe, if you write a certain blog post or if NSA puts out a particular ad, if that makes you squirm, and you don't like it, and you're going to want to send an email, registering your displeasure with somebody.
I doubt you're applying to Greyfriars.
Then I sort of think that you don't want to come.
Signed, a concerned brother.
Yes. But I think it's important to go, like, not everybody has there is a particular calling of the satirist, that has that serrated edge, the prophetic spice. And not every minister even needs to have that. There's plenty of ministers who don't. They need to be bold and courageous and speak the truth, but they don't have to have that particular skill in order to go into ministry.
It's a body life thing. Barnabas was the son of encouragement, and that characterized his pulpit ministry. He was a great encouragement. The Apostle Paul was didactic, and his letters are crammed full of truth in every nook and cranny. So it's a body life thing. There's exhorters, there's teachers, there's preachers and proclaimers, there's
evangelists.
And I'd say though the Moscow mood is such an interesting phrase, anyways, because what's packed into that statement? It's not just the serrated edge. So what you should be pursuing in ministry and preaching is preaching the word in a way that pops, preaching the word in a way that hits, that does its work, like it's a living word. And there's actually something about the mood. There's be the aroma of Christ that's an aroma of life to life to those who are being saved, and death to death to those who are perishing. There's actually, that's a mood, and that is something that so serrated edge, maybe I'm not a satirist, but there's actually something here that you might not be interested in the mood, but the mood's interested in you. Like it's going to be around, and it's going to have some kind of impact on you. And I would encourage you to probably say, there's something potent here that I want.
What we want you to do is, particularly if you get a call to a more liturgical church where they have those cloth thingies hanging over the pulpit, you could have one of the ladies in the church embroider on it, "I really don't care, Margaret."
What
you don't have to.
You don't have to. If so, you get a Greyfriars graduate 3 years after they're done. Where like, what's the path? What do they come here? And I've had conversations with prospective applicants, and it basically is, I'm coming here and then I don't know what's next. When you guys think about what might be next for a guy, when you kind of want to paint a picture of, here's at least some possibilities. The Lord can do what He wants, but here's some possibilities. What sort of possibilities do you think for Greyfriars?
This is, I think, is something that is quite striking. When the CREC first started, I'd travel around, speak at different CREC churches, and there were a lot of startups and churches meeting in storefronts, and it was very much a pilgrim denomination. And in recent years, as I've been traveling to CREC churches, a lot of them own their own building. It's like grown-up churches.
It's a real church.
And I thought, well, we ought to make a collection of photographs of church buildings so that people who had their impression formed 20 years ago, oh, the CREC is a toy denomination. Well, it's actually not anymore, which means, and we've been around long enough that a lot of the planting pastors or the senior pastors are within shouting distance of retiring or moving on. And
or that great promotion in the sky.
Or that great promotion. And that means that I see the ideal situation is mentoring here, finishing Greyfriars, and becoming an associate pastor under an experienced pastor, where you would, 3 years from now, you'd be serving in that role. And then after X number of years in that role, either assuming the lead pastor position of that church or moving on to another church. Okay. So I think we're now in a position to have, in the early years, we would as soon as we graduate, guys, some hungry outfit on the East Coast would say, "Can you be our pastor?" Yeah. So a lot of our men, our early graduates, sort of were thrown in the deep end. But I think we're now in a position to have a more normal gradation into senior leadership.
And some of that will depend too on the age of guys coming in and where they are in life. So there are guys that sometimes are coming to Greyfriars in their 30s or approaching 40, and they may be in a position, having had life experience and family experience and other ministry experience, such that they're ready to go right into the, plant a church or fill a pulpit straight on. But for a lot of the younger guys, I think it's a great thing to be aiming for, finding a seasoned minister, at least a church plant that's closely associated with another established church, where you can be getting continued mentorship and input as you get your feet under you.
Do you think is Greyfriars only for guys who do feel a call, though, to be a lead, like ultimately be a lead pastor preacher, or you have guys who think, I'm not sure that I'm the lead pastor preacher, but I think I'd be a great associate, an executive minister, preach some, but do a lot of the, in a church that has 400 people, doing more of that kind of thing. Or, I'm really drawn to more of the counseling side of things. And I can preach, but where I really want to devote my time and effort is in marital counseling and things like that. Should that guy think I should go to Greyfriars, or I should go find a place that offers an MDiv in counseling or an MDiv in some other thing? Or should they say, no, Greyfriars is still going to be a great fit?
I think it'd be a great fit either way.
Yeah, I talked to someone not too long ago who was thinking about, he had thought about preaching ministry, but was starting to lean toward counseling ministry, and asked me about this very question. And I said, I think we actually need a lot more solid Christian counselors. We need men who are trained theologically, biblically, and so on to be counselors. But I think part of the problem we have in our culture is a whole bunch of it gets siloed off into just counseling and therapy and all this stuff. And it wasn't really rooted and grounded in a orthodox theology, in a thorough knowledge of the Bible, and real pastoral ministry. So I think it's either way you land, it's really great.
And sometimes the way we think about ministry, we have some of this enlightenment stuff that Doug's been talking about, or we're like building our own avatar of ministry and what it is that we think that we're called to. You need an awareness of yourself and what your gifts are. But I would say one of the key things that is going to happen with guys coming through is, like, at some point, reading Doug's Rules for Reformers and thinking strategically about the objective, and then that's a different deal. Like, it's like we're storming Normandy. Right. Well,
this is not my gift.
This is not my gift. Well, I'm a general. I'm not a this. Like, dude, like,
grab the gun and go.
Yeah.
As soon as you get objective, and most pastors are generalists and probably can do, like, they could easily do a counseling thing. There's different things that they could do. Right. But you're thinking strategically about the mission, where to go. Right. Obviously, it's been well known that Moscow and Pullman, that was strategic. Well, Doug's dad, Jim, came here. So if a guy's thinking like that, it gives him more options of what he might do.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I've thought about that I think, and I hope we see this, is guys who come and kind of team up. They go through 3 years together. There's a brotherhood that kind of forms. And one of the possibilities for what it might look like is you've got a guy who's going to be the lead pastor, and then a guy who's going to go with him and be the headmaster of the school that's going to start up with it.
Yeah.
And then he's going to be able to fill the pulpit, once a month. But his main role is going to be starting a classical Christian school or teaching Bible for the high school or things like that. Because I think we do get so narrowly focused on if I'm called to minister, if I'm called to ministry, that means pulpit ministry as the lead pastor of a church that preaches, 48 times a year.
Come here, get your education, and find your Barnabas.
Right. Yeah. But when I think about my own, like I went to seminary thinking I was going to be a lead preaching pastor. I've never been a lead preaching pastor, right? I've been a pastor now for over a decade, but I've never preached more than say once or maybe twice in a given month at my church, even here. So you're in a similar way, right? Like we're both ministers.
I started with the guitar.
So
did I.
Multiple years
right.
just playing them, man.
Yeah. But there's a way in which, you're a main preaching pastor. You're a main preaching pastor,
right.
but I'm not. I'm a professor who moonlights as a pastor, right? I'm a professor by day and a pastor by night. You teach, at Logos, and at the school and everything. So there's basically a lot of different pathways. The real question is, are you called to shepherd God's people with the word? And then figure out where.
Yeah.
I think this is actually an outworking of Archipiarianism, where it's not unusual to find people doing all sorts of things, all of Christ for all of life. And the leaders in that are demonstrating in different areas of life.
Yeah.
Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
But the Swiss Army knife thing is interesting too, and probably related to our overall approach. And there are guys that claim to be a Swiss Army knife and aren't doing any of it well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like cheating. It's kind of like cheating. It's like, oh yeah, but to be able to have a few tools in the kit and do those things at a high level, when you're any kind of entrepreneur, starting something, building culture, I mean, this is going to be a hallmark, I think, of what happens at Greyfriars. Because when I came out here 3 years ago, we were laboring probably for seven years or so in doing very similar things, like pushing in similar directions. But there was still kind of a whole new world of culture and decision-making and moves that are related to preaching God's word to God's people. There's so many things that are the same, but there's a cultural impact dimension that requires you to have a few more tools in the toolkit. And I think that people get that.
I think a lot of this, too, is related to having a more anti-fragile ministry. Because if you only have one set of skills, which is the problem, Ben Merkel has talked about this in terms of education in general, what New St. Andrews is trying to address in general, is this problem of hyper-specialization, which then renders you almost useless to do anything else. And then, but the world is far more complex and far more messy, and the ministry is far more complex and messy. And so being trained in liberal arts and then broadly in the liberal arts of ministry, which is, I think, what this Greyfriars Hall MDiv is going to be all about, it will allow you to be the most useful you can be for the Lord, for the King. And so I think, thinking that you can craft your avatar, that's a good image, is kind of silly if you think about it. And it's like, no, he's the king, he's the general.
Here's your avatar.
Right. And avatars can shift. Your calling is going to change at different points. So I've been an associate pastor and lead pastor at different times. Yeah. I moonlight as a teacher. Yeah. I'm on Cross Politic. I write. There's a number of different things, and I actually find that to be very, very rewarding. And I find things that I'm working on over here that suddenly are applicable over here, and then something I'm preaching about suddenly pops. And wait a second. And I think that is going to make that kind of well-rounded minister, regardless of the exact place you are in the ministry, is far more effective.
Okay. Two last situations that I want you to address. So you have a guy who is wondering, man, I'm not sure I can relocate, and we don't offer anything, online. We're a residential program because being here and experiencing the whole thing is really important. Guy like that, how should he think about that question of relocation? If he doesn't, should he be looking at online seminaries? Is that a legitimate way? How should he approach that question?
It's better that online education is great for people who can't relocate. God's called you. You're taking care of elderly parents. Yeah. You'd be disobeying God's law to abandon them to come here. There are people who can't relocate, and there are people who are already pastoring, let's say, and they can't leave the church, but they want to they want to jack the house up and get a foundation under them. Reformed Evangelical Seminary would be a good option for people
who resonate with our sort of theological vision but can't relocate. Right. Reformed Evangelical is a great option to consider.
Right. So God bless them. So basically, it's an individual calling. But we believe that what we do is going to be incarnational, and we have to get to know you, and you have to get to know us. And we think that involves breathing the air out of the same room.
The face-to-face, life-on-life piece is a really important element of what we're trying to do.
And the move is big. I mean, we're in North Idaho. Yeah. I'm a born and raised Floridian. There are no alligators. There's less sun.
We have no spiders. We have
no spiders, no mosquitoes of any kind.
Hoarfrost, man.
Hoarfrost.
You didn't even know what hoarfrost was.
But I remember back in the day looking at seminaries and thinking about the difficulties of moving. And so I think there's two categories. As Doug said, there is straight up, like, we just can't do it. It's actually financially it's totally not feasible. We've asked people to support us. We've considered work. We just can't do it. Well, if you can't do it, you can't do it. But there's this other category. And the key thing is the other category isn't this massive green light always. It's not like every box is checked. There's always risk in this other category. So imagine a guy sitting there going like, moving, I mean, this would be big. And maybe I've got a couple kids, or at least have a wife. And I want to say there's actually something in that is related to what ministry is going to be like the entire time. You will have to make hard decisions, risky decisions. And if you're not willing to make them, like, the ministry doesn't grow, it doesn't work. If you're only always kind of treading water. Right. So that sense, like, consider the cost, weigh the cost, pray it out, get wise counsel. But dude, if you're in position to do it, I'm going to tell a guy, like, learn to hit the gas pedal, lean into it.
Take the risk. Last one would be a guy who doesn't really have, maybe he's a little older, hasn't been in school in a while, or was never the best student, right? But is a solid leader, but wonders about academic chops. I don't know if I have the academics. How do you help a guy like that? Maybe he's a little more blue collar, but thinks, man, I really want to be a pastor, and I want to be a pastor maybe in a blue collar context in which his way and his experience would be an asset. But he looks at what we're offering and goes, I'm not sure that's for me because it seems too heady. How do you help a guy like that make the call?
The question I have for him is he gripped by the Bible, and is he gripped by the study of God, theology? So, I mean, I think I remember in college, I was writing a boring paper, and I had to read it, and then the teacher was very displeased with me. She was a lady, she was displeased, and she's like, and your citations? And I was like, citations? These are just my thoughts. Was I supposed to have footnotes? So that was my college. Because I was very uninterested, and shame on me, I should have worked harder. But I was gripped by Scripture. I was gripped by theology, and I just loved it. So if that guy is going to that's going to be what he needs. He needs love of God, love of study, love of Word. He doesn't have to be a huge brain.
What I would do talking to that person is his concern might be a genuine concern. It might not be for him. He might be able to serve in a country community church somewhere at the level where he already is or could attain to. But sometimes men like that are unduly humble. And if he expressed this concern to me, I'd say, what are the last 5 books you read on your own? And I look at that list, and I think you're going to be fine.
Yeah, right.
Augustine, City of God.
Yeah, right. Yeah, good. So if there's guys out there who have read the books, watched the videos, listened to the podcasts, and they go, man, I want to see what this looks like with legs on it. I want to see what this theology that I love. This is why I went to seminary. It's like, I want to see what it looks like with legs. I want to see it incarnational. Then we're saying Greyfriars Hall, go ahead and check us out.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks, guys. This is great. Hopefully that gives some clarity to guys who are out there maybe thinking that they want to join us in the future at Greyfriars Hall.